Welcome back to the podcast de Philippe. Today we're going to be sort of diving into a fascinating question, and perhaps a slightly unsettling one too, right?
Absolutely.
Who actually benefits from economic downturns?
Yeah.
We're going to explore this concept by looking at two very distinct periods.
Okay.
The Great Depression of 1929, and then a hypothetical economic downturn in March of 2025.
Interesting.
To help us unpack all of this, we've enlisted the analytical power of ChatGPT and Perplexity.
All right.
And don't forget, we need your help reaching 1,000 subscribers on YouTube today.
It's important to remember that economic shifts, whether they're recessions or full-blown depressions, create both winners and losers.
Yeah.
What we're trying to understand is how certain players are often uniquely positioned to capitalize on these changes.
So let's rewind the clock back to the Great Depression. When we think of that era, we often picture breadlines and widespread hardship.
It's true.
But were there individuals or companies who actually thrived during that time?
Absolutely. Take, for example, industrial titans like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. They actually managed to increase their wealth and influence during the Depression.
Which seems kind of counterintuitive. How is that even possible when everyone else is struggling?
It all boils down to capital. These individuals had vast reserves of it even during the downturn. This allowed them to buy up failing competitors at a fraction of their true value. Essentially, they were consolidating entire industries under their control.
So while others were losing their shirts, they were consolidating their empires.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just the ultra-wealthy who found opportunities. Were there businesses that perhaps, due to their adaptability, managed to not only survive, but thrive?
Think of companies operating in essential sectors.
Yeah.
Things people always need, even during a depression. Some railway companies, for example, benefited from favorable operating conditions at the time.
And of course, we can't forget about the role of the government. Roosevelt's New Deal was all about using public works projects to stimulate the economy and put people back to work.
It's a classic example of how a government in times of crisis can become a major economic force. Even if the initial goal is simply to respond to an emergency, the effects can be long-lasting and transformative.
And this is where it gets really interesting to me. Think about the entertainment industry, specifically Hollywood, during the Depression.
Right.
People needed an escape.
They did.
And movies provided that in spades.
It really highlights the power of escapism, even in the darkest of times. People crave stories, entertainment. A break from reality studios like Warner Bros. And MGM capitalized on this, especially with the rise of talkies.
And can we talk about the investors who saw opportunity amidst the chaos?
Yeah.
Not everyone lost money during the market crash.
Take Joseph Kennedy, for example.
Yeah.
He not only anticipated the crash, but actually sold his stock holdings beforehand.
That's incredible timing. How did he know?
Well, there were warning signs, of course. But Kennedy had also cultivated a network of informants who provided him with insights into the market. He understood the risks and acted decisively.
So it's not just luck. It's about information timing and a willingness to make bold moves. To bring this to life, think about the release of Disney's Snow White in 1937.
Oh, yeah.
Right in the heart of the Depression, it was a massive box office hit. People were lining up to see it.
It shows that even in difficult times, there's a market for stories that uplift and inspire.
All right, so we've explored some of the individuals and industries that came out on top during the Great Depression. Now let's fast forward and consider a hypothetical scenario set in March of 2025.
Okay.
What we've asked ChatGPT and Perplexity to analyze is this. If there were to be an economic downturn, who might benefit in light of some of the trade and economic policies that have been implemented in recent years?
It's important to approach this with a critical eye. We're not making predictions, but exploring possibilities.
Okay, so let's imagine a scenario where there's a major push to relocate manufacturing back to the U.S.
Right.
This could be driven by various factors.
Of course.
Like trade policies, tariffs, the desire to create jobs domestically. Who stands to benefit from this kind of shift?
Well, companies moving production back to the U.S. would obviously be in a strong position. They could benefit from protectionist tariffs, potentially making their products more competitive within the U.S. market.
And we've already seen real-world examples of this happening. Companies like Stellantis, the car manufacturer, have been reopening plants and investing heavily in various U.S. states.
And then you have other major automakers like Nissan, Mercedes-Benz, and Honda all making moves to boost their U.S. production.
Oh, wow.
Even tech giants like Samsung and LG are considering shifting some of their manufacturing from Mexico to the U.S. So there's a definite trend emerging.
So in this hypothetical scenario, could we see a resurgence of American manufacturing?
It's certainly a possibility, but it's also crucial to look at the potential political ramifications. For example, If there's a perception that these policies are bringing jobs back to America, it could have a significant impact on certain voter bases.
Interesting. So it's not just about the economics. It's also about how those economic changes are perceived and how they feed into the political narrative. But what about the investment world? Are there any potential winners in that realm?
Private equity firms and hedge funds often thrive in times of market instability. They acquire devalued assets like companies or real estate at low prices, betting on a future recovery.
So they're basically bargain hunting on a massive scale.
Precisely. And they have the resources and the risk appetite to capitalize on these opportunities. And then you have companies that are agile enough to adapt quickly to global supply chain disruptions.
You mean companies that can pivot and find new sources for their materials or products?
Exactly. Think of businesses that can reorganize their sourcing to avoid tariffs, perhaps by working with local suppliers or those in countries not targeted by trade restrictions. That kind of flexibility can be a huge advantage in uncertain economic times.
So it's all about being adaptable and finding ways to work around obstacles.
Exactly. And there are also sectors that are less vulnerable to tariffs, like domestic fossil fuel producers, who might benefit from certain exemptions, or the defense and security industries, which are often insulated from federal budget cuts.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good picture of who might benefit in this hypothetical scenario. But now let's flip the coin and look at the potential downsides. Who might end up bearing the brunt of the economic fallout?
That's a vital question to consider. And to delve into that, we need to examine the factors that could potentially contribute to an economic downturn and who might benefit from those very factors.
It's like asking, to whom does the crime benefit, even if we're not talking about anything illegal?
Precisely. It's about understanding the potential risks involved and how those risks might actually create opportunities for certain players.
So let's talk about those risks. What are the potential downsides for the average person in this hypothetical 2025 scenario?
Well, one of the most immediate and tangible risks is rising prices, often a direct consequence of tariffs on imported goods.
Right?
This means consumers end up paying more for everyday items.
So we're talking about things like electronics, clothing, maybe even food costing more.
Exactly. And that erosion of purchasing power is a serious concern. When people can buy less with the same amount of money, they tend to cut back on spending, which can further slow down the economy.
It's a domino effect, right? Less spending leads to a slower economy, potentially more job losses, and so on.
It's a legitimate concern. And speaking of job losses, that's another potential risk associated with economic downturns. If businesses struggle due to rising costs or reduced demand, they might be forced to lay off workers, which can exacerbate the problem.
So it's not just about things getting more expensive. It's about people's livelihoods being at stake.
That's right. And then there's the issue of household debt. If inflation is on the rise and interest rates are high, it becomes more expensive to service existing debt, whether it's mortgages, student loans, car loans, or credit cards.
So people are getting squeezed from multiple directions.
It's a real possibility, and economists are closely monitoring these factors. And let's not forget those investors we talked about, the ones scooping up assets at bargain prices. Where do those assets often come from?
From people who are struggling, people who are forced to sell because they can no longer afford to hold on to those assets?
Exactly. It highlights the potential for economic inequality to widen during times of crisis.
So we've got rising prices, reduced purchasing power, potential job losses, and the risk of a debt crisis. That's a lot to unpack. Where do we go from here?
I think it's important to remember that we're talking about potential risks, not certainties. And this is where preparedness comes in. Individuals and businesses need to think about how they can best navigate potential economic uncertainty.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What are some strategies for weathering the storm, so to speak?
It starts with understanding your financial situation. Take a hard look at your income, expenses, and debt levels. Make sure you have a budget in place and you're living within your means.
It's all about financial literacy, right? Understanding where your money is going and making sure you're not overspending.
Absolutely. And if you have debt, explore options for consolidating or refinancing to lower your interest payments. It might also be a good time to build up an emergency fund just in case you experience a loss of income or unexpected expenses.
Those are all great tips. What about investing? Is it a good idea to invest during times of economic uncertainty?
That's a tricky question. It depends on your individual circumstances and risk tolerance. Some people might choose to hold off on investing until things stabilize, while others might see it as an opportunity to buy assets at a discount.
So there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Exactly. The key is to do your research, understand the risks, and make sure you're not investing money you can't afford to lose.
Solid advice for any time, really.
Absolutely. And remember how we talked about those Companies that can quickly adapt their supply chains, well, that principle applies to individuals as well. Being adaptable and open to new opportunities is crucial in navigating uncertain times.
So it's not just about battening down the hatches and waiting for the storm to pass.
Not at all. It's about being proactive, thinking creatively, and being open to new possibilities.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about potential winners and losers. In a hypothetical economic downturn, explored some of the risks involved and even offered some tips for preparing for the unknown. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder.
I'm intrigued. Hit us with that thought-provoking question.
All right, so here it is. Knowing that economic crises often create both winners and losers.
Right.
How can we as individuals and as a society work to create a more resilient and equitable system?
Yeah.
One that minimizes the negative impact on those who are most vulnerable while still allowing for growth and innovation?
That's a powerful question. It's about finding that balance between individual responsibility and collective action, about creating a system that supports everyone, not just those already at the top.
Exactly. It's about building a better future together. But that's all the time we have for part 1 of this deep dive. Make sure to join us next time as we continue exploring the complexities of the economy and its impact on our lives.
Welcome back to the podcast de Philippe, as we continue our exploration of potential economic winners and losers. I think it's essential to focus on the concept of preparedness.
You're right. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this talk of economic uncertainty. But as you said earlier, knowledge is power. So let's shift gears and focus on what individuals can do to prepare for potential challenges.
Absolutely. And it begins with recognizing your own vulnerabilities. Take a moment to consider where you are most exposed in a potential downturn. Is it your job, your investments, your debt levels?
It's almost like conducting a personal risk assessment.
Exactly. Once you have a clear understanding of your vulnerabilities, you can begin to develop strategies to mitigate those risks.
For instance, if someone is worried about losing their job, what steps could they take?
They might consider diversifying their skills, updating their resume, or even exploring alternative career paths. It's about being proactive and not simply waiting for things to happen.
So it's not just about bracing for impact. It's about being adaptable and prepared to pivot if necessary.
Precisely. And this applies to businesses as well. Companies that are nimble and can adjust to changing market conditions are more likely to weather the storm.
That makes sense. But let's not overlook the emotional aspect of all this. Economic downturns can be incredibly stressful, even if you're financially prepared. Do you have any advice on how to cope with that anxiety?
That's a great point. It's important to acknowledge that economic uncertainty can have a significant impact on our mental well-being. Staying informed is important, but it's also crucial to limit your exposure to negative news and concentrate on the things you can control.
So perhaps it's a good idea to step away from the constant barrage of news for a while.
Exactly. Engage in activities that bring you joy, connect with loved ones, and practice self-care. Remember, you're not alone in this.
It's about finding sources of strength and support, both within yourself and in your community. This brings us back to the question we posed earlier. How can we build a more resilient and equitable society?
This question extends beyond individual preparedness. It's about advocating for policies that promote economic security for everyone, not just a select few. It's about fostering a sense of community and understanding that we are all in this together.
And perhaps through these conversations and raising awareness, we can begin to shape a future where economic downturns are less devastating and where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That is indeed the hope and a goal worth striving for.
Well said. And on that note, we'll conclude part 2 of our deep dive into the world of economic uncertainty. We trust you found it informative, thought-provoking, and perhaps even a little empowering.
Remember, knowledge is power. By understanding the intricacies of the economy, we can all make more informed decisions for ourselves, our families, and our communities.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back for the final part of this episode soon, where we'll continue to explore the complexities of the economy and its impact on our lives. Welcome back to Le Podcast de Philippe for this final part of our deep dive into economic uncertainty. We've covered a lot of ground, from the unexpected winners of the Great Depression to the potential risks and opportunities of a hypothetical downturn in 2025.
And as we wrap up this conversation, I keep coming back to this idea of resilience, both on an individual and societal level.
It's easy to feel powerless when we talk about these large-scale economic forces. But I think what you're getting at is that we're not entirely at the mercy of these events.
Exactly. There are steps we can take both individually and collectively to build resilience and navigate uncertain times more effectively.
So for individuals, where does that process of building resilience even begin?
It starts with an honest assessment of your own vulnerabilities. Ask yourself, what aspects of my life are most susceptible to economic shocks? Is it my job, my investments, my level of debt?
It's almost like a personal stress test for your financial life.
That's a good way to think about it. Once you identify your weak points, you can start developing strategies to strengthen those areas.
So for someone concerned about job security, what might that look like?
They might consider upskilling or diversifying their skill set, perhaps by learning new technologies or exploring certifications that are in high-demand networking is also crucial. Building relationships and making connections can open up unexpected opportunities.
So it's not just about hunkering down, it's about proactively seeking out ways to make yourself more valuable and adaptable.
Precisely, and that same principle applies to businesses as well. Companies that can pivot, innovate, and respond quickly to changing market conditions are more likely to not just survive, but thrive.
It's all about agility and responsiveness. But let's not forget the human side of this. Economic downturns can be incredibly stressful, even if you're financially secure. Any advice on how to cope with the emotional toll?
It's essential to acknowledge the emotional impact of economic uncertainty. It's okay to feel anxious or stressed, but it's crucial to manage those feelings and not let them overwhelm you.
Easier said than done, right?
Of course. But there are things you can do. Staying informed is important, but don't get caught up in the 24/7 news cycle. Limit your exposure to negative news and focus on what you can control.
It's about finding that balance between awareness and overload.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of self-care. Make time for activities that bring you joy, connect with loved ones, and prioritize your mental well-being.
Those are all great reminders. And this brings us back to that bigger question. How can we create a more resilient and equitable society, one that's better equipped to handle economic shocks and protect those who
I think it starts with a shift in perspective. We need to move away from this idea that economic downturns are inevitable and simply something we have to endure.
So instead of just bracing for impact, we should be thinking about how to prevent those impacts in the first place.
Exactly. It's about advocating for policies that promote economic security for everyone, not just a select few. It's about investing in education, job training, and social safety nets that can provide a cushion during tough times.
It's about creating a system that's designed to support people, not leave them behind.
Precisely. And it's about fostering a sense of community, recognizing that we're all in this together.
So on that note of collective action and shared responsibility, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of economic uncertainty. We hope you found this conversation informative, insightful, and perhaps even a little bit inspiring.
Remember, knowledge is power, and by understanding the complexities of the economy, we can all make more informed decisions for ourselves, our families, and our communities.
Thank you for joining us on this journey, and be sure to subscribe to Le Podcast de Philippe on YouTube so you don't miss our next deep dive into a topic that matters.